April 14, 1943, North Atlantic, 400 miles southeast of Greenland. The sea is a heaving wall of dark steel. The wind claws across the waves with a knife-edged chill, and the sky is nothing but fog, sleet, and the low rumble of distant engines. And then, through the static of the storm, those engines grow louder. Obersteuermann Carl Fischer is the first to hear them. He's been standing at the bridge of U-193, soaked to the bone, scanning the horizon for a convoy that slipped away hours earlier. For a heartbeat, he believes the distant hum might be a blessing, another merchant ship, another chance to redeem a week of empty torpedo tubes. But then the hum becomes a roar. Not merchant engines, not friendly Luftwaffe patrols. These are heavier, deeper, wrong. Fischer grips the rail as the lookout bellows down the hatch. Flugzeuge, zwei Maschinen, aus Westen, low approach. Inside the pressure hull, Kapitän Leutnant Rudolf Hartmann doesn't hesitate. Crash dive, down, down, down. Diesels howl, seawater pours through the open hatch as the crew shoves it closed. The bow tips downward sharply, glass rattling, lockers slamming shut. Sweat mixes with condensation on every man's face as the U-boat slips beneath the surface just as the first Allied aircraft streaks overhead. The depth gauge spins. 10 meters. 15. 25. Then the sea erupts. 2 RAF Liberators, part of a hunter-killer group escorting North Atlantic convoys, release depth charges in tight patterns. The blasts slam against the hull like giant fists. Light bulbs burst. Men are thrown from bunks. The generator stutters, coughing sparks. Hartmann steadies himself against the chart table, knuckles white. He knows the truth. U-193 has been limping for days. The batteries are weakening, the fuel is low, and the last violent storm damaged the forward dive planes. Another sustained attack will finish them. The second Liberator makes a pass. More charges, closer this time. The boat screams, steel twisting, bulkheads groaning under pressure. Seawater sprays through a hairline crack in the stern compartment. Men scramble with wrenches and wooden wedges, fighting the leak in the dim red emergency lights. Hartmann's orders cut through the chaos. Blow ballast, surface, now! The crew freezes. Surface? Into aircraft fire? But they know the numbers. If the depth charges don't crush them, the battery's failure will. And if the batteries fail, the ocean finishes what the RAF started. Compressed air surges through the ballast tanks. The U-boat rises, shuddering as it forces itself upward. The surface breaks like a sheet of black ice. Foam crashes across the deck as the conning tower breaches the waves. Fischer throws the hatch open and is hit with bitter, freezing wind. He climbs up and immediately sees the Liberator banking around for another run. This time, machine guns flash from its nose and side turrets, stitching lines into the sea all around the surfaced submarine. Hartmann raises the white flare pistol. His officers stare at him, some in shock, others in silent relief. A German U-boat surrendering in mid-battle is almost unheard of, but the war is no longer the one they were trained for. The flare arcs into the sky. Almost instantly, the Liberator ceases fire. It circles above like a great metal vulture, watching. Minutes later, the gray silhouette of a Canadian destroyer escort, HMCS Prescott, cuts through the fog. The ship slows, backing its engines, holding a cautious distance. Its deck guns stay trained on the battered submarine. A loudhailer booms over the water. German submarine, prepare to be boarded. Do not attempt to scuttle your vessel. The U-boat crew lines up on deck, shivering, soaked, and exhausted. Some men try to stand at attention despite frozen hands and torn uniforms. Others look at the sea instead of the approaching sailors, ashamed. Fischer spots the Canadian boarding party climbing down into a launch, rifles slung, ropes ready. But something strange happens. The Canadians don't look angry. They don't jeer or curse or threaten. They move with calm, almost clinical precision. One sailor even nods as their eyes meet, as if this is simply another duty, not a moment of vengeance. It unnerves the Germans more than hostility would have. Within minutes they are ferried to the Prescott, their wet boots clattering on the steel deck. The crew is separated,
searched and wrapped in heavy wool blankets. Hot metal mug cups are pressed into their hands. Fisher stares at the steam rising from the surface of the liquid. Coffee. Real coffee. He has not tasted anything like it since the winter of 1941. Hartman meets eyes with one of his officers. Neither speaks, but both share the same thought. This is not what Berlin promised them. The destroyer turns towards the west, towards Canada, and the German sailors huddle against the cold, unaware that the storm is behind them. They think the storm is behind them. They have no idea what awaits on land.
April 20th, 1943, St. John's Naval Dockyard, Newfoundland. The German prisoners line the destroyer's rail, squinting as the gray fog slowly thins. The harbor appears in fragments: wooden piers, cranes, fuel tanks, bundled dock workers, curious civilians. A thin smoke haze hangs over the shoreline, drifting from rows of chimneys that promise a warmth none of the U-boat men have felt in weeks. Obersteuermann Carl Fischer grips the railing, hands still raw from exposure, and stares as the Prescott is guided toward the pier by tugboats. The wind bites deeply, but it carries something unfamiliar: the smell of bread. Fresh bread, baking somewhere beyond the warehouses. Beside him, Funkmott Erich Vollner murmurs, "This can't be right. Civilians are walking freely here, no guards with rifles pointed." He sounds almost disappointed, as if captivity should look harsher, darker, more in line with what Berlin had insisted. The Prescott's engines throttle back. Lines are thrown. The destroyer eases against the bumpers with a dull, final thud. Canadian MPs line the pier, rifles slung casually over shoulders, not aimed. One of them calls out, "Welcome to Newfoundland, boys. Keep single file and we'll get you sorted." Sorted, Fisher thinks. The word carries no threat, only routine. The prisoners disembark under watchful but relaxed eyes. Their boots clatter onto the wooden planks as warm air from a nearby warehouse rolls over them. Inside, stoves glow orange. Tables are laid out in long rows. Hartman notices it first. He stops walking. On the tables, bowls of stew, loaves of bread, jugs of milk, coffee pots steaming. This must be a trick, a propaganda display, something staged purely for morale exploitation. But the food is ordinary, imperfect, real. A Canadian petty officer taps Hartman on the arm. "You and your men will eat here before transport. Rules say you get a hot meal after capture. Don't worry, plenty more once you get inland." Fisher nearly laughs. Inland? What prison camp feeds its captives before even reaching the gate? Vollner leans in and whispers, "Rudy, they're feeding us better than the training depot did." The men sit stiffly at the tables. They eat slowly at first, waiting for a catch, waiting for questions or leaflets or threats. None come. The stew is thick. The bread is soft. Someone refills Fisher's mug before he even notices it's empty. Across the room, a cook, a young woman with hair tied in a scarf, laughs at something a Canadian sailor says, then glances toward the Germans. Not with hate, not with fear, with curiosity. It is the first time Fisher realizes the chasm between what he'd been told and what he sees. By afternoon, they are herded, not harshly but efficiently, onto the CPR troop train with barred windows and 2 guarded cars. The locomotive whistles, brakes release, and the train begins its long journey northwest. The interior is heated. Actual heat. Not the damp cold of a submarine or the barely functioning radiators of French billets, but a full, steady warmth that makes the U-boat crew drowsy within minutes. Hartman removes his cap and sits back. "They treat us like guests," he mutters. "Why?" Fisher doesn't answer. Not because he lacks an explanation, but because something outside the train has captured his attention. Children. On a platform in a small fishing town, children wave at the passing prisoner cars. Some run alongside the rails, laughing, shouting friendly greetings. Fisher has no idea whether the children understand who was inside the train, but none of them look afraid. The landscape changes mile by mile, rocky coastlines fading into dense forests, then long stretches of empty white where spring has not yet touched the ground. Snow still clings to the shadowed ravines. The Germans huddle near the windows, watching Canada roll by, silent with a mixture of awe and confusion. By the time the train reaches Truro,
then Moncton, and finally the broad interior beyond Quebec, the men have stopped whispering about escape. Some quietly admit they're more comfortable here than they've been in months. When the train finally slows near the outskirts of Bowmanville, Ontario, the U-boat crew glimpses high fences, tall spruce trees, guard towers, and sprawling wooden barracks. Fisher feels tension return at last. This looks more like a prison. But the gates open smoothly. The guards nod. A sergeant waves them forward. And somewhere beyond the barracks, rising through the crisp northern air, Fisher smells something he hasn't encountered since childhood. Steam. Clean, hot steam. He doesn't know it yet, but he is about to step into the single biggest shock of his captivity.
April 23, 1943. Camp 30, Bowmanville, Ontario, Canada. The parade square is quiet, except for the wind rustling through tall spruce trees. Rows of wooden barracks set in long, neat lines. Guard towers overlook fenced walkways. Everything is orderly, but not bleak, more like a boarding school than a prison. A Canadian officer with a clipboard steps forward, reading names with a brisk, almost bored tone. Fisher, Carl, Volner, Eric, Hartman, Rudolph. Step forward. The three men obey, each expecting sudden barked orders, rifle butts, or at the very least a stern shove toward confinement. Instead, the officer merely nods. You'll be in Block C. You'll have medical evaluation, new clothes if needed, and, he pauses, glancing up, you'll take a hot shower before bed. Some of you look half frozen. The Germans exchange looks. A hot shower? Medical evaluation? Replacement clothes? This level of calm procedure is unnerving. Fisher shifts uncertainly. He can still feel the Atlantic biting through his uniform, still hear the blast of depth charges. It seems impossible that captivity could include warmth. The men are marched, not shoved, toward a long, low building with brick steps. Inside, warm air envelops them instantly, heavy with the unmistakable scent of heated water and soap. A Canadian corporal opens a door to a tiled room filled with steam. All right, fellas, strip down, towels on the bench, tags on the hooks. Showers are to the left. You'll get 10 minutes each. 10 minutes? Aboard a U-boat, a man might go weeks without a proper wash. Water was rationed to sips, not baths. Hygiene meant wiping sweat and diesel oil with a rag dampened from the condensation pipe. The idea of running water, let alone hot water, was closer to fantasy. Fisher enters the shower room and stops dead in his tracks. Rows of shower heads stretch along the tiled wall. Pipes overhead hiss gently. Steam rises in pale clouds. The sound of water, clean, abundant, luxurious, fills the air. He reaches out and twists one of the valves. A jet of hot water bursts forth instantly, splashing his hands and arms. He jerks backwards, stunned. Behind him, Volner whispers, "Carl, this is impossible. Even our officers didn't get this." Hartman says nothing. The Capitan Lieutenant simply stands there, eyes fixed on the flowing water, his jaw tightening, as if struggling to reconcile two worlds. The cramped, diesel-soaked steel coffin they lived in, and this. Fisher steps forward again, slowly this time. He places both hands under the stream and watches gray streaks of grime run off his skin. The water feels like needles at first, so hot, so alien, but within seconds his muscles begin to loosen. Tension he didn't even realize he carried melts away. Around him, other German sailors do the same. Some laugh quietly, some sigh with relief. One young stoker, barely 20, begins to cry softly, tears mixing with the shower spray. He mutters, "Ich habe vergessen, wie es sich anfühlt." I forgot what this feels like. Volner tilts his head back, letting the water pour over his face. "The Allies treat their prisoners better than we treat our own recruits," he says, voice muffled. "If word of this ever reached home—" Hartman answers sharply, "It won't." But even he doesn't sound convinced. After the showers, the men are handed clean towels, soft wool socks, and Red Cross hygiene kits, complete with razors, soap, toothbrushes, and even chocolate bars. The Canadian corporal gestures toward the exit. Mess halls open, dinner in 10. Dinner. Not interrogation, not punishment. Dinner. The mess hall buzzes with voices, English, French, and German. Long tables filled with steaming plates, meatloaf, potatoes, vegetables, bread, slices of pie. Some German prisoners from earlier arrivals sit comfortably, laughing at jokes, playing cards at the adjacent table.
Fisher can hardly process it. "How long have you been here?" he asks one of them. "Since 41. It's not paradise," the man replies, shrugging. "But compared to the Atlantic, compared to U-boat life," he taps his plate, "this is the first time in my adult life I've eaten until full." Volner digs into the food with ferocity. "Our people back home, they think prisoners are beaten, starved." He trails off, not needing to finish the sentence. Hartman sits rigidly, fork in hand, staring at his plate. His mind is elsewhere, on Berlin's speeches, on Joseph Goebbels' broadcasts, on every briefing that warned the Allies were monsters. Everything he sees contradicts it. Fisher leans in. "Capitaine, what do we tell our families when this is over?" Hartman doesn't answer. He only looks around the mess hall, at the warmth, the food, the steaming mugs of tea, the guards chatting politely with prisoners, and realizes something he never expected. If German civilians ever learned the truth about Allied POW camps, the entire foundation of Nazi propaganda would crumble, and this is only the beginning.
May 29, 1943, Camp 30, Bowmanville, Ontario. Carl Fisher awakes to the sound of a bell. Not an alarm klaxon, not a shouted command. A bell, steady, almost polite. Sunlight filters through the barrack windows, pale and soft, illuminating rows of bunks stacked too high. The room smells faintly of soap and fresh wood, not diesel fuel and sweat. For a moment, Fisher is disoriented. He expects the low ceiling of a submarine, the vibration of engines, the ever-present tension of being hunted. Instead, there is space, air, quiet. "Breakfast in 20, someone calls out in German, from another prisoner, not a guard. Fisher swings his legs down and feels something strange under his feet. Warmth. The barracks are heated. He stares at the radiator along the wall, a dull metal thing humming gently, and shakes his head. In Wilhelmshaven, back home, his mother now lines windows with blankets to keep the cold out. Coal is rationed. Heat is a privilege. Here, behind barbed wire, it is routine. Outside, the camp is already alive. Prisoners walk freely within the compound, some carrying books, others heading toward the workshop buildings. A group of men kick a football across a dirt field, shouting and laughing. A Canadian guard watches from a tower, rifle slung casually, eyes more bored than hostile. Fisher joins Volner and Hartman in the mess hall. The food is plain but filling. Oatmeal, eggs, bread, jam, coffee again. Always coffee. "They feed us like workers, not captives," Volner mutters. "That's exactly what they want," Hartman replies. "They want us productive, calm." But even as he says it, Hartman knows the explanation is insufficient. Days turn into weeks. The U-boat men are assigned duties: woodworking, camp maintenance, kitchen assistants. They are paid a small wage, camp currency usable at the canteen. Fisher uses his first earnings to buy cigarettes and a notebook. A notebook. He hasn't been allowed to write freely since before the war. In the recreation hall, Fisher discovers shelves of books, English novels, German classics, even technical manuals. He spots Goethe, Schiller, a worn copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Volner stares at the shelf in disbelief. "They let us read whatever we want?" A guard overhears. "As long as it's not instructions on escaping, knock yourself out," he says with a grin. Sports follow. Football matches, boxing baths, chess tournaments. Even a camp orchestra forms, instruments supplied by the Red Cross. Music drifts through the compound on warm evenings, echoing softly against the fences. The most unsettling part is not the comfort, it's the normalcy. One afternoon, Fisher sits on a bench beside an older prisoner named Hans Keller, a former merchant sailor captured in 1941. "They'll break us eventually," Fisher says quietly. "This is just patience." Keller chuckles. "No, if they wanted to break us, they'd do it the easy way. Hunger, cold, fear." He gestures around the yard. "This makes men think." Think. That is the danger. Letters from home begin arriving weeks later, carefully censored, heavily filtered through Nazi postal control. Fisher reads his mother's shaky handwriting, describing air raids, shortages, rumors of Allied brutality. They say prisoners in Canada are beaten, starved, forced to work until collapse. Fisher folds the letters slowly, eyes lingering on the words. That night, he writes back. He chooses his language carefully, knowing censors will read every word. He avoids direct contradiction. He simply writes, "I am warm, I am fed, I am alive." The letter will never fully reach her as intended. Too much truth is dangerous. In the barracks, discussions grow more frequent. Quiet debates. Whispers about the war's direction. Prisoners exchange rumors from BBC broadcasts secretly picked up on smuggled radios. Hartman listens more than he speaks. He observes the younger sailors, men who once believed unquestioningly, now asking questions that would have been unthinkable aboard a U-boat. "Why do they have so much?" one asks.
Why aren't they afraid of us? Another wonders. If they can spare this for prisoners, what does that mean for the war? Hartman has no answers that don't lead to uncomfortable conclusions. One evening, after another hot shower, still miraculous even after weeks, Fisher sits on his bunk, steam still clinging to his skin. He realizes something profound. The showers are not kindness alone. They are confidence. Canada can afford to give enemies hot water, full meals, books, sports, and time to think. Germany cannot. And slowly, inevitably, that realization spreads through the camp like warmth through cold steel.
August 1943, Camp 30, Bowmanville, Ontario. The heat is mild, nothing like the suffocating air inside a submerged U-boat. Windows are open. Birds move freely along the fence line, unbothered by barbed wire. On the parade ground, prisoners sit in loose circles, shirt sleeves rolled up, trading cigarettes and stories. Carl Fisher finishes a letter, folding it carefully before sliding it into the outgoing mail tray. He knows it will be read. He knows it will be censored. So he chooses words that can slip through. We work during the day. We read in the evenings. I have not been hungry since arriving. The guards treat us correctly. No adjectives, no emotion, just facts. Around him, dozens of other German prisoners are doing the same. That is when it begins. Not a revolt, not an escape, a leak. Despite Nazi censorship, letters from POWs make it home. Some are delayed, some are edited, some never arrive. But enough get through, enough to plant doubt. In Hamburg, a dock worker hears from his captured son that Canadian guards share cigarettes. In Bremen, a wife learns her husband showers daily. In Berlin, rumors circulate that POWs in North America are playing football and eating meat. The stories don't match the radio broadcasts. Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda responds swiftly. Newspapers warn civilians that prisoners are being deceived, pampered temporarily for Allied photographs. Radio commentators insist conditions will worsen. The Americans and Canadians, they say, are soft now, but cruel later. Inside Camp 30, Hartman reads translated excerpts of these claims on a bulletin board. He almost laughs. If this is deception, it is the most expensive deception imaginable. By autumn, the camp population grows. New arrivals from captured U-boats in the Bay of Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic bring fresh eyes and the same stunned reactions. The pattern repeats every time. First, suspicion, then disbelief, then silence. One new prisoner, a mechanic named Otto Brandt, stands frozen in the shower room, staring at the running water. "Turn it off," he whispers urgently. "They'll hear, they'll punish us." Vollner gently reaches past him and adjusts the valve. "No, Otto, this isn't a trick." Brandt breaks down minutes later, sobbing into a towel. Psychologists are not needed. The contrast does the work. Canadian officers notice the change. Prisoners become calmer. Fights decrease. Escape attempts drop to almost nothing. Guards loosen patrols, not from negligence, but confidence. One officer writes in his report, "The prisoners no longer behave like men at war. They behave like men waiting for it to end." Hartman begins holding informal lectures in the barracks, technical discussions about engines, navigation, strategy. But these conversations drift inevitably toward larger questions. What happens after the war? What happens to Germany? What happens to us? For the first time, Fisher hears officers speak critically of decisions made by Berlin, quietly, carefully, but openly enough to matter. By winter, snow blankets the camp again. Steam rises from buildings. The showers never stop running. Then comes the news of Stalingrad's aftermath, filtering in through Allied broadcasts and whispered translations. Then Sicily, then Italy. Each Allied victory is processed not through fear, but through inevitability. One night, Fisher sits with Hartman outside the barracks, snow crunching underfoot. "They didn't beat us here with weapons. They beat us with normal life," Fisher says. Hartman nods slowly. "They showed us what a country looks like when it doesn't need to lie to survive." In Germany, the letters keep coming. The contradiction grows too large to ignore. And when captured soldiers eventually return home, years later,
they will carry more than memories of defeat. They will carry proof. Proof that the enemy was never the monster described. Proof that the Reich had lied. Proof that abundance, not brutality, had won the war. The hot showers were never just about hygiene. They were about something far more dangerous to a dictatorship: truth.